everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the fourth Landmark Sessions event produced by Oxford American Magazine and our partners at Blake Street Wellness Center and the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. I am Danielle Jackson, managing editor at the Oxford American. And first I want to start out by thanking our partners, Blake Street and UAMS. They've been wonderfully supportive and willing to co-create these intimate exchanges between artists and thinkers and our audiences. And this is the fourth event. They've all been super musical and insightful and fun, and I know that this one will be too. So more on that. Tonight we'll talk about the gorgeous and insightful new book, The Meaning of Soul, Black Music and Resilience Since the 1960s. This book came out a little bit over a month ago and was published by Duke University Press. According to its publisher, in The Meaning of Soul, Emily J. Lordi proposes a new understanding of this famously elusive concept. In the 60s, she argues, soul came to signify a cultural belief in Black resilience, which was enacted through specific musical practices. Inventive cover versions, falsetto vocals, ad-libs, and false endings. Through these soul techniques, which Lordi walks us through in the book using a method of close listening that we'll talk about a little bit later in the evening, artists like Aretha Franklin, Donny Hathaway, Nina Simone, Marvin Gaye, Isaac Hayes, and Minnie Riperton performed virtuosic survivorship and thus helped to galvanize Black communities in an era of peril and promise. So to talk about the book, we have with us its author, Emily J. Lordi, Associate Professor of English at Vanderbilt University, and also the author of Black Resonance and Donny Hathaway Live. Welcome, Emily. Also, we are so lucky to have with us DJ Lynnée Denise, an artist, scholar, writer, and lecturer in the Department of African American Studies at UCLA. Lynnée Denise coined the phrase DJ scholarship to reposition the role of the DJ as a party purveyor to that of an archivist, cultural custodian, and information specialist of music with critical value. So hi, Lynnée. Thank you for joining. Thanks to both of you. So tonight we'll talk about the book, of course, and get a little into what soul is and through talking about some cover songs and the art of sampling and DJ scholarship. But I want to start the night off with the music, which to me is the most important thing. And then after that, we'll hear a little bit from Dr. Lordi's book. So let's dive on in. Here is I've Got to Use My Imagination from Imagination, the 1973 studio album by Gladys Knight and the Pips.
I've really got to use my imagination to think of good reasons to keep on keeping on.
one of the things among many that I love about this book, well, I guess first I want to say that it's from the first time I read it, which was I think earlier this spring, it was a really wonderful companion to listening to music I already loved. And it's, there's like a teaching spirit the behind I think your prose and who you are as a storyteller. In addition to being a beautiful prose writer that really invites and it really invited me in. So just I love the book. So first I want to get that out of the way. So another thing I really love is that its primary goal and primary aim is to define soul, like just very straightforwardly to give a definition of soul. I think so much writing that I've read talks about soul or defines it by not defining it or by describing it as something that is like mystical and not describable. So I guess so that we're all on the same page, like at home and among us, what is soul? Like what is it as a genre of music? What is the logic of soul or soul as a way of life that you talk about in the book? What is it?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. And that was precisely the question that I set out to answer in the book. Thank you also, by the way, for reading it and for noting that the teaching spirit and the effort made to write prose that would engage and help the listening of a broad audience. So what is soul? Soul, I guess, first of all, yes, I'll say what I don't think that soul is. So soul has often been talked about, as you said, in this very kind of mystical way, as this kind of like timeless essence binding all Black people together across time and space. And there were actually good reasons for people to describe soul in that particular way in the late 60s. And some people did talk about it like that. Or soul has been understood to be a genre of music, rooted in the Black church and in sort of sacred traditions and gospel, blending gospel, blues, and R&B traditions. And so, that definition, the latter definition, is at play in the book. But what I wanted to do was to try to personalize soul, to make it something that people could actually get a better handle on. And one reason for that, I'll just say briefly, has to do with, and this is something that Lynnée picked up on as well, conversations within academia that really privilege this idea of the post-soul, in contradistinction to this kind of like hazy, ill-defined, but nevertheless like kind of problematically racially essentialist and heteropatriarchal idea of soul. So people don't really define soul in these academic conversations about how great post-soul is, but nevertheless, it's something kind of bad. So I wanted to say, listen, like those conversations are kind of whack. We need to actually get clear about what soul is. And to that end, I read widely, in the Black press and elsewhere, asking what did the writers, theorists, and musicians who developed this concept, in the late 1960s, when soul becomes like this keyword of kind of Black cultural production more broadly, like what did they think they were doing? What did they think that soul was? And what I found was that they weren't so much defining soul as like a thing, an essence, a kind of music, as they were articulating this logic whereby struggle and suffering that was particular to Black people actually had a very particular worldly payoff. And that payoff meant a couple different things. It meant deeper emotional depth. In a kind of general sense. It meant collective belonging to other Black people who would experience similar things. And it also meant, in the musical sense, this idea of a kind of heightened virtuosity that precisely through having to work so hard, struggle and strain to get over, to make one's name for oneself, that musicians had developed a kind of extraordinary performative capability. And that was the logic of soul. It said, like, yes, things have been harder, but through that, through many toils, and snares, I have already come, but there's an amazing grace on the other side of it. And that grace was was often a kind of musical grace. And finally, I'll just say that I think, that idea that struggle could yield something beautiful was particularly salient and necessary at a time of great transition in the late 1960s, early 1970s, as there's so many deaths of leaders and uncertainty, and yet also hope and promise. And people are trying to figure out, how do we rally? How do we keep going? And soul music and the idea of soul were really important tools to helping people do that.
So I want to move on just a little bit and make sure we have time to talk or get a little bit more in detail about your practice, Lynnée. And I know you have some like music and some kind of visuals for us to play. I think maybe we could go into the rock steady slide.
Okay.
And we can talk about covers and samples a little bit after that before we head out.
EMD is a world for me. 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 Cool on the scene like a horse in a stable. A brother got ill and tried to snap the fat cable. I stepped back like it wasn't no thing.
We just heard EPMD's I'm Housing, which was one of the tracks from their debut album, Strictly Business, in 1988. And then we heard Aretha Franklin's Rock Steady, which was from her Young, Gifted, and Black album in 1972. And interestingly enough, I discovered EPMD's version first and had no idea it was a sample, which I think is a gift, like, to then be exposed to the original, to learn that it was Aretha Franklin after, having been sort of, almost conditioned into the world of what her greatest hits are, and not necessarily those B-sides. And so discovering that sample just changed the game for me for so many reasons. A lot of times when we're thinking about sampling as an art form, James Brown, Isaac Hayes, these men continue to dominate the way that we even think about sampling. And there have been so many women who have been sampled, but Aretha's Rock Steady song in particular has been sampled over 100 times. And it's significant to me for so many reasons. A, this is the album that she created and produced after Amazing Grace. And so it also doesn't get, I think, the kind of attention that I think it deserves because of this monumental, offering with Amazing Grace. But also that she wrote the song, which is also rare. She wrote Rock Steady, and she wrote another song on that album, Daydreaming, another heavily sampled song. And it just made me think about, Black women's intellectual, property within the context of hip hop, and hip hop as a repository for these sort of samples and these stories. And again, this citational practice, which is what I think sampling is or can be seen as. And so I created that slide as a part of a presentation that I did in 2019 for a conference that I co-produced with Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter at UCLA, which is a conference on Aretha Franklin shortly after her death. And Emily was a part of that conference because I read her work on, Aretha Franklin's Dr. Feelgood, and was so incredibly moved, again, by the care, by the attention to the detail of craft, And by the reading of Aretha as this like spiritual, sexually charged, brilliant mastermind, scientist, pianist, thinker. And so that is where this sort of the story came from. I actually wrote an essay for the Black Scholar outlining what I call the afterlife of the Rocksteady sample, and found so many connections that I think, again, speak to even like very much so in conversation with Emily's work, in that I'm reading Emily's work and I feel like I'm seeing samples. She samples Tony Cage, she samples Audre Lorde, she samples Amiri Baraka. So like I'm thinking about sampling as, just like I keep saying, a citational practice, period, and the importance of who we cite and who we don't cite. And so that essay and that presentation at UCLA was very much so designed to like have us even think about Aretha being covered, right? And think about the number of times that Rocksteady has been covered by jazz musicians, by reggae artists, or thinking about Rocksteady as a subgenre of reggae music, thinking about Rocksteady as a dance because the song itself is instructive, right? Move your body from side to side. Thinking about Rocksteady and sexual innuendo, thinking about Rocksteady and the Whisper song that came out in '87, right? So this Rocksteady life is layered, and it's interesting to dig through the crates to find all these connections. But again, I just wanted to take a moment to honor Aretha and think about what it meant for her to be covered, since there's such a major and a well-deserved emphasis on her mastery of covering folks, right? But that song has been covered and sampled in ways that I would love us to sit more with.
From your essay, which is called The Afterlife of Aretha Franklin's Rocksteady, a case study in DJ scholarship. It's available on the website of the Black Scholar. I did learn that Rocksteady had been covered or sampled over 100 times, and I had no idea. And you definitely absolutely don't hear about that in hip hop. So, I mean, briefly, I would love to hear from Emily talk a little bit about maybe what she feels like is the meaning of like a cover song, like, or the many meanings, or what a cover song can do. So you talk in the book about Aretha's cover of Bridge Over Troubled Water, as well as her cover of Someday I'll Be Free, the Donny Hathaway version. What's in a cover?
Well, I'll just speak to, and I think that Falana asked that question, and I consider Falana to be sort of like a rising Whitney Houston scholar, who's really taking her time with Whitney's work and making these important connections between, Whitney and Sissy's work as a background singer, backup singer, and also Whitney's connection to Aretha. So interesting. I don't remember what video it was. It may have been I Want to Dance with Someone, but somebody, and I think just remembering that Aretha Franklin has a cameo, just a picture of her in the video, making it clear that I am a part of this long-standing legacy, but I'm very interested in this complicated relationship between Clive Davis and Whitney Houston, that I feel like was a huge part of why a lot of Black folks were distancing themselves from her. But in terms of the 90s and this erasure, I think that also speaks to the house music vocalists that are oftentimes hidden behind producers or replaced with women who are less, fully figured, and just this whole erasure of Black women's voices that shaped the sounds of like house music in the 1990s. So those are just some of my initial thoughts.